I don't even think in this program that we got into the whole Adrian Peterson thing. I think we touched on it, but what we didn't even talk about this week, and you and I hadn't even mentioned it, but it just occurred to me, is that apparently it has created this massive sort of conversation in the country about corporal punishment and spanking, and there's all sorts of sort of regional nuances, racial nuances, and class nuances that apparently have been part of this conversation. I don't spank my kids. I don't. I don't hit them. I shove them around a little bit, but
maybe hang them out the window a little bit if they're being annoying.
I just I do that line from Commando. Do you remember Smitty? As he was hanging on to the thing, and I told you you'd be the last to die. No, of course I don't.
I lied. Yeah, that kind of thing. That was a good line, too.
Yes.
Although I like that guy a little bit better in Warriors, but that's a whole other conveation.
Now, are you a spanker? Are you a spanker?
Am I?
Yeah.
No. I'm a big believer in that we teach people that violence is the answer, whether it's sending people off to war immediately before trying to work things out, telling people to stand their ground, or all the way down to hitting your kids. It's sending that message that we can't use the brains that we theoretically were born with and solve our problems any other way besides violence. So I try my best. I think I've grabbed my kids once or twice in frustration and then let go. And I fought that impulse to ever to do anything violent. And as you know, kids can drive you to that point.
Oh my God! But, I never. in all honesty. I remember when, I don't know what it is. Saul's just an easier kid, I guess. Or maybe after the first kid, something inside of you, your life has already been crushed. So your expectations are less about what.
As have your spirits.
Right. Exactly. But, I distinctly remember with Mila, who was not a sleeper at all and would just wail, I could really imagine how shaking baby syndrome happens. I mean,
right.
And
you can, because then you even imagine in certain circumstances there aren't parents that mean harm by it, but you just sort of pick a baby for a second, shake him or her for a second, just like, please stop.
Right.
But you have to realize, of course, what that can do ahead of time, and not do it, because babies are so obviously fragile even to a slight shake, and and it goes that way for spanking too. And then but again, I think that's a conversation we should have as a country about what we're comfortable with and what we're not. I know there's certain cultural differences, but there's certain cultural differences and religious differences in the way women are treated, and it doesn't
right.
mean we respect
That's
that
right.
religion or culture over women's rights in this country. So. But you still have to take it and understand the difference between, there's some people out there who spank their children on their bottom in a way, and that's certainly not comparable to what Adrian Peterson did in any way,
right.
shape, or form.
Right.
When you're
I
picking
think
up
that's
a
absolutely right.
wooden branch and smacking the hell out of your child,
A 4-year-old.
There are lacerations, a 4-year-old, yes, where there are lacerations on his body, including his testicles. That's something that I'm sorry. I mean, that to me, that you should be in prison.
Absolutely, absolutely.
And
it's interesting because I was spanked. I mean, I just watched this clip of Sean Hannity. We're getting way off topic here, but I saw this clip of Sean Hannity.
This is an important topic, though, so I'm glad we're covering it. I don't think we've talked about it.
Sean Hannity was talking to a panel, and he kept saying, I was hit with a belt. Now, I got hit with a belt as a kid. And I forcibly had my mouth washed out with soap more than once as a kid. And
in your parents' defense, you probably deserved it.
Well, I'm
having fun with you.
But it's funny because that's what Hannity kept saying. Is I deserved it. I deserved it. And, that to me sounds like a guy who's just trying to sort of justify why his parents effed up. And, you know,
you have to remember, though, that that's Sean Hannity. I mean, you're trying to think this out and say, you know, did my parents go too far? Is that an appropriate way? Like, I was spanked too.
I have no hesitation in saying, like, I don't know. I imagine I was a very obnoxious kid, but I wasn't, you know, I wasn't lighting the house on fire or anything. But I will say this, that, like, it was wholly inappropriate. I knew it was inappropriate at the time. And, you know, when I got big enough, essentially, I mean, I remember the last time I got hit, and it was basically I got hit and I just stood there and I just looked at my dad. I said, you know, now you may have some problems. And
I'm going to hold your ass down and start spanking you, pal.
I mean, honestly, but, you know, and I grew up, you know, determined not to do that to my kids. Now, with that said, like, I do remember one time when Mila was probably around 4, where we were having a big fight about brushing her teeth, and she was getting physical with me. And I just sat down, I put her on my lap, and I held her in my arms, and I said, guess what? We're not moving here until you brush your teeth. And about an hour and 15 minutes later, because I just wanted to basically show her, and it occurred to me at that point too, like, it's much easier as a parent if you do not have, if you don't have somewhere to go, because at one point you will be able to just simply outlast the kid. And we just sat there, and there were times that she struggled, and I didn't squeeze, but I also didn't, like, she was locked in there, and we were just sitting there. And, like, you know, after an hour and 15 minutes, she brushed her teeth. I never had a problem again. Because
there you go. Well,
but I don't think it wasn't the physical
not even
part.
Comparable to spanking.
Right.
Sam. But I mean, I've done that a number of times where I've restrained my kids, not held them hard or whatever, but wrapped my arms around them. Remember, I've got 2 boys too, and you'll see what that's like soon enough, Sam. And when they're flailing and want to fight and want to whatever, you've got to put your arms around them. And I mean, I've done that. I don't consider that any kind of, that's to prevent them from hurting themselves, frankly.
Right.
You know, I mean, or someone else. Yeah, I don't know. That's a different story. I'm just saying, I still think society, you know, not everything's black and white. In Sean Hannity's world, everything is, because everything's about, you know, what his talking points are. So watching him on something like that is useless. But for those of us who have brains and are trying to think these things out, I think you can find a place where you say, well, maybe it's okay for some parents to spank. That may not be how I want to handle it, but it's a much different thing with an open hand on somebody's bottom than to pick up a belt or a tree branch. I mean, my God. You know, the thought, I mean, just my thought, because this is a 4-year-old boy. I have a 4-year-old boy.
Yeah,
the thought of standing there while my kid is bawling and crying, and, you know, with how much I love my son, the thought of looking at that and continually hitting him, I mean, I don't understand how Adrian Peterson's a human being, frankly, with any, I mean, that frightens me that somebody could do that. It really does.
Yeah, I mean, that to me just seems like a total, I mean, it's just almost unimaginable. The kid is so small, but, you know, the data shows it's a little bit less clear with sort of like controlled spanking, although I don't think when most people spank that they're like, okay, come on over here, blah, 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 and it's that controlled. But the data is quite clear that type of violence doesn't work, you know, even in the short run. I mean, maybe it works for 10 minutes, but it doesn't work much longer than that. And, you know, if you believe that is an appropriate way for a 4-year-old, for God's sakes, it seems to me that really what you should be doing is going out and just getting some type of like cattle prod or like ankle bracelet and just giving them a shock, because at that point, like, you just perceive this kid as, you know, an animal, and we don't even allow people to do this to animals. So
no,
I understand. Like, we would never allow a dog or a puppy to be whipped
if somebody walks by and you're
stick.
hitting a puppy with a branch,
they take the dog away. They take the
for
dog
animal
away.
cruelty. You know, I mean, the thing is also here, and this is important too, I always try to look at the broader themes here. we've known this for a while about the NFL. I mean, if you took any basic psychology, you probably learned about some of the more aggressive men who have the extra Y chromosome and how much more prevalent that is among certain athletes, professional football players, hockey players, who are more prone to violence.
Hosts.
Talk show hosts, definitely people who host radio shows, let's say between the hours of what is it, 11 and 1.
Right.
But I think when you realize how bad it is and how much they're covering it up, and that the Ray Rice thing was clearly going to only be the tip of the iceberg, and since Adrian Peterson, we've now had 2 more NFL players charged with spousal abuse. One for headbutting his wife because she didn't want to have sex with him. I can't think of what his name is. And so now that the press are starting to pay attention to these things, they're just going to have to redo everything in the NFL. I mean, this is not something, even if you want to cover it up, even if you're as much of a bastard as Goodell seems to be, you can't, because these guys have never been taught that this behavior is unacceptable. They just haven't. It's been covered up their whole lives because they were stars, in grade school, high school, college, if they went. They literally may need all sorts of classes and who knows what to teach some of these guys how they behave around women. And I'm not making excuses for them, because I think you should instinctually have some ideas on that one. But I think some of these guys grew up in homes where this was acceptable behavior. As you said, there are cultural differences. A lot of people were who knows how Adrian Peterson was punished by his parents. My guess is he was hit with all sorts of objects.
Right.
If he thought that was acceptable behavior. So I think, the NFL is going to have to do something, and they're going to have to invest major money in it, and they're going to have to do it right, or you're going to see this stuff all the time, because the press is now going to pay attention.